Ronnie Coleman once had the greatest bodybuilding had ever seen. Today, he needs crutches just to get around. Jay Cutler intentionally gave up more than 80 pounds of muscle after retiring. And Jean-Pierre Fuchs lost the body that made him famous after one devastating squat changed his life forever. These are the bodybuilders who lost the bodies that made them legends. Ronnie Coleman won the Mr. Olympia title 8 consecutive times, a run that between 1998 and 2005 saw him dominate the Mr. Olympia competition, winning 8 consecutive titles and achieving 26 professional victories. He was famous for the kind of numbers that made other pros look small by comparison. 2,000 pounds leg presses, 800 pound squats, and 200 lb dumbbell chest presses. He competed for the last time at the 2007 Mr. Olympia and walked away as the most decorated bodybuilder in history. Today, Coleman gets around on crutches or in a wheelchair. That's not an exaggeration for effect. It's the literal day-to-day reality that's been documented across dozens of interviews, videos, and news updates for close to a decade now. The 8-time Mr. Olympia and living legend many regard as the GOAT of bodybuilding now, at 61, walks with 2 crutches or is propelled in a wheelchair. So how did the most dominant physique in the sport's history end up here? The story starts long before his final competition. Coleman traces his first back injury to a powerlifting meet when he was just a teenager. As he recounted in his autobiography, Ronnie Coleman suffered his first back injury when attempting to squat 500 in a powerlifting meet at only 17, describing a giant flash of lightning that penetrated his lower back, burning his entire backside. That was the first crack in a foundation that would carry hundreds of thousands of pounds over the following decades. The real damage came later. He pinpoints his first herniated disc to a squat session in 1997. A doctor recommended surgery right then. Coleman didn't take it. Instead, he did a lot of heavy lifting for the decade after herniating his disc, piling up 8 Olympia titles on top of an injury he never properly addressed. It wasn't until after his final competition that he finally went under the knife. Ronnie Coleman competed for the last time at the 2007 Mr. Olympia, and only then did he finally address his back pain with the spinal surgery a doctor recommended 10 years prior. A decade and a few thousand more sets of heavy squats, too late. That first surgery was supposed to fix things. It didn't. It was the first of many such surgeries, none of them truly successful. Coleman had both hips replaced in 2014, and then in December 2015, everything got dramatically worse. He got off an airplane in Russia after a long flight and noticed his back was especially sore. It only got worse. 2 days later, he was on crutches, and he's needed them to walk distances ever since. The following month, back home in Texas, he underwent a back surgery that lasted 13 hours. According to Coleman, everything was downhill from there. From that point, the surgeries kept coming. In 2018 alone, he had 3 spinal surgeries, his 8th, 9th, and 10th. One to fuse vertebrae, another to fix screws from the previous surgery that had broken, and a third to replace all the screws with bigger screws. The costs piled up right alongside the procedures. Coleman has said the last 3 surgeries alone cost him almost $2 million. And even those weren't the end of it. In 2020, having broken a socket, he had both hips replaced again. Add it all up, and the tally is staggering for a man who once looked physically indestructible. All told, he's had 13 surgeries, to his hips twice, his neck twice, and his back 9 times. He's had surgery on all 25 spinal discs. His entire spinal column is fused, except for one disc, which is now herniated. Coleman himself has described the hardware holding him together in blunt terms. Talking to Joe Rogan about his rebuilt spine, he laid out exactly what's inside him now. I've got 14 screws, 2 cages to hold discs together, 2 rods about this long 18 inches in there too. The physical toll shows up in his daily life in ways that go far beyond just looking smaller than he used to. Today, Ronnie Coleman can only walk short distances without crutches. Beyond that, his legs begin to feel too weak to hold him because of the nerve damage in his back. He still works out regularly, though with only light weights, and he still sticks to a bodybuilder's diet, though for only 3 meals daily, instead of the 6 or more he ate during his competitive years. The man who once leg pressed a ton now measures success in whether his legs will hold his weight across a parking lot. It hasn't stopped either. Just last summer, Coleman's situation took another turn for the worse. Coleman was hospitalized with a serious infection that drew global concern. Now aged 60, He has faced years of debilitating surgeries and is often seen using a wheelchair. A recent medical emergency in late June forced him to cancel a planned appearance in the UK. His family confirmed he had been hospitalized with a bloodstream infection and described his health as complex but showing signs of progress. And just over a week later, there was another complication requiring emergency surgery. What's remarkable is that through all of it, Coleman has refused to let the story end in defeat. He's leaned on every recovery tool available to him, chasing one specific goal. He has pursued treatments such as stem cell therapy, physical rehabilitation, and hyperbaric oxygen sessions, with a goal of walking again by 2027. He's put a real timeline on it, telling fans what his doctors have said. His doctor told him that in about 2 years he'd be able to walk again, and in another 4 years he'd be able to run. That would put him at a full decade since his mobility first collapsed. A decade defined not by leg presses and posing routines, but by wheelchairs, crutches, and a body working overtime just to stand. Coleman's transformation is the most extreme version of this story in the sport, but it's far from the only one. Once the competitive pressure to hold onto 300 pounds of stage muscle disappears, bodybuilders react to that freedom in wildly different ways. Some, like Coleman, get dragged there by injury. Others make the call themselves. Jay Cutler falls into that second category, and his transformation looks nothing like Coleman's. Jay Cutler ended Ronnie Coleman's 8-year reign at the top of the sport, and the two men remain forever linked in bodybuilding history. Cutler is a 4-time Mr. Olympia winner, having won in 2006, 2007, 2009, and 2010, and a 6-time runner-up, the most in history. He retired from competition in 2013 at the top of his game, still capable of stepping on stage and competing for another title. Instead, he walked away, and what he's done to his body since is a completely different kind of transformation than Coleman's. Cutler didn't lose his physique to injury or health collapse. He chose to lose it deliberately on his own terms. After retiring from competition in 2013, he significantly changed his training regimen, resulting in a notable loss of muscle mass, though his workout tweaks have allowed him to stay in optimal shape and healthy into his 50s. That's the key difference in his story. Coleman's body broke down around him. Cutler took his 260-plus pound Olympia frame and consciously dismantled it, piece by piece, in the name of long-term health. He's been candid about the numbers involved in that shrinkage. Cutler revealed he's tipping the scales at 225 pounds currently, a massive drop from his competitive weight, which regularly sat well north of 250. He's talked about how that change actually feels in his own body. If you ask me what's different in my 50s, and I feel like my body, I feel like I'm still staying in good shape. I've definitely lost some muscle mass, and for the first time ever I feel like my metabolism doesn't demand because I think I lost the muscle mass. I'm only 225 now. It's worth pausing on that. This is a 4-time Mr. Olympia telling his own audience on camera that his metabolism has changed because the muscle that used to demand constant feeding simply isn't there anymore. That's the physical reality of what happens once a body stops being trained and fed to support 260-plus pounds of stage-ready mass. The mental shift behind it is just as telling as the physical one. Cutler has described his current approach to training almost like a completely different activity than what built his Olympia physique. He's called it a kind of meditation now rather than the pursuit it once was. When I want to get down to my business and meditate with what I call my training meditation now. Cutler says, contrasting it with how he used to train, pushing weight, chasing pumps, wanting to see how full his chest could get. Now his question is different. What do I have to do to maintain a decent physique at my age and stay relatively lean and not be big? I just don't want to be big. That line, I just don't want to be big, coming from a man who spent 2 decades trying to be as big as humanly possible, captures exactly what separates his story from someone like Coleman's. He's even acknowledged out loud how much smaller specific muscle groups have gotten. Working through a back exercise on camera, he talked about popping the lats for a front double bicep pose, admitting he's kind of duplicating the motion, even though my lats are a lot smaller right now. Cutler hasn't disappeared into obscurity the way some retired competitors do, either. Almost a decade into his retirement, Jay Cutler remains a prominent voice in the strength sports sphere, maintaining a YouTube channel with 546,000 subscribers and over 4.2 million Instagram followers. That platform means every stage of his physical decline has played out in public, documented in his own words, rather than pieced together secondhand. He's not shy about the trade-off he made, either. When asked point-blank whether bodybuilders can retire from the modern sport in good health, his answer was blunt. He believes in today's era of bodybuilding, it is impossible to leave healthy. No, not in the open, not in today's era. Is anyone walking out on a field or when you compete in sports? If you're a swimmer, if you're playing basketball every other day, is anyone healthy at that point? That's a four-time Mr. Olympia, essentially confirming that the version of himself that beat Ronnie Coleman on stage was never a sustainable, long-term state to maintain. Interestingly, Cutler's downsizing hasn't been a straight line down and out. He's gone through cycles, building back up for milestone birthdays, and then deliberately shedding size again right after. He transformed his body for his 50th birthday, and now intends to prioritize longevity with a downsized physique at 52 years old. In his own words describing that latest shift, "As many of you know, I'm not really working on the size game as much anymore. Just keeping the tone, keep the muscles active. Flexibility is important for me. So I just want to make sure that I'm sticking to a routine that allows me not to be drastically sore the next day." Even his own effort to slim down hasn't always gone the way he wanted. There was a stretch where Cutler openly admitted he was frustrated with how slowly the smaller version of his body was coming together. Jay Cutler focused on his own physique transformation, but was not completely satisfied with the results, saying, "Not happy with the progress, I'll be honest. I expected maybe a little more, but I forgot about how important following nutrition was," while working on rebuilding toward his best shape since stepping off stage. Even downsizing, it turns out, takes its own kind of discipline, just aimed in the opposite direction from the one that built his Olympia trophies. In the opposite direction from the one that built his Olympia trophies. What makes Cutler's case such a contrast to Coleman's is that he, still by every account, looks good doing it. He's stayed active in guest posing appearances years into retirement and has been described as looking shredded well into his 50s. But strip away the flattering lighting of an expo stage, and the numbers tell the real story. A man who used to walk around at a competition weight in the 260s now sits comfortably in the mid-200s on a normal day. By his own admission, having consciously let go of muscle mass he spent 2 decades building. That's still a bodybuilder who lost a huge chunk of his physique. He just got to choose how it happened. Not every competitor gets that choice. For some of the biggest names from the 90s mass monster era, the shrinking wasn't a slow, managed retirement plan. It was abrupt, and for the public watching from the outside, it was jarring. If Ronnie Coleman's story is about injury, and Jay Cutler's is about a calculated health decision, Paul Dillett's transformation is about just how far a body can travel from where it started. Dillett was one of the most visually extreme physiques of the entire 1990s bodybuilding scene, a competitor whose sheer scale made him stand out even in an era packed with mass monsters. At the 1996 Grand Prix, Dillett brought one of the most massive and eye-catching physiques of the era, known for his incredible size, wide frame, and freaky muscle bellies, a combination of sheer size and unique structure that made him one of the most memorable competitors of his time. Today, people who grew up staring at posters of that physique describe the current version of Dillett using a word nobody would have dared use in 1996: small. Paul Dillett was once one of the biggest bodybuilders on the planet, yet many people today call him small when they see recent photos of him. That's the scale of the shift. From a competitor whose entire reputation was built on being physically enormous, to a man whose current photos get compared unfavorably in size to his own decades-old prime. The numbers make the contrast concrete. At his competitive peak, Dillett was carrying a frame that looked almost engineered for the stage. At 30 years of age, Dillett was in his prime and competing, so he had a perfectly conditioned body, a 29-inch waist, and weighed 290 pounds. That's a nearly 300-pound frame pulled down to a 29-inch waist, the kind of dramatic taper that made him one of the most photographed bodies of his generation. Compare that to recent photos from over 3 decades later, and the picture showed up in a line but perfectly maintained physique. No longer chasing anything close to 290 pounds. No longer built around a stage-ready taper, just a much smaller, leaner man. What separates Dillett's story from a health collapse, though, is that this wasn't forced on him. He's been open about the fact that once the competition stopped, so did the reason to carry the weight. Dillett has explained he no longer had a reason to maintain a 300-plus pound bodybuilding physique after retiring from competition. His goal was never to stay stage-ready forever. It was to move on, prioritize his health, and enjoy life beyond bodybuilding. That's a direct, first-person explanation for exactly the kind of transformation the sports fans see over and over. Not a body breaking down, but a body being deliberately let go. Fitness Volt, which has covered his career for years, described the shift in blunt terms. After retiring from bodybuilding, Paul Dillett completely shed his skin and focused his energies on other aspects of his life. He let go of the massive and iconic physique that made him famous. The Canadian downsized significantly, slowly transforming into an average person. His impressive physique eventually became a distant memory. That last line matters. A distant memory isn't hyperbole. When you're talking about a man once nicknamed Freakenstein for how unnatural his mass looked on stage. Dillett didn't vanish from public life once the muscle came off, either. He pivoted into the business side of the industry that made him famous. Dillett did not stop working on other ventures. He started personal training businesses and became an entrepreneur. And in 2007, became the owner and CEO of the World Bodybuilding and Fitness Federation, or WBFF. So while the physique disappeared, the connection to the industry he built his name in never really did. And the reaction to his current look has been almost entirely positive, which says something about how bodybuilding fans have started to view these transformations differently than they used to. Rather than mourning the loss of the mass, commenters have praised what replaced it. One fan commented, "He looks good and great job staying fit." The percentage of 300-plus pounds 60-year-olds is very low, lower for 70-year-olds, and microscopic for 80-year-olds. Longevity demands staying as slim as possible. The numbers don't lie. Another zeroed in on the specific thing that makes Dillett's case stand apart from some of his peers. "He looks good at 60 years old, healthy, not in a wheelchair," one supporter wrote. That comment lands with extra weight once you know what happened to some of Dillett's contemporaries. From that same 90s mass monster era, men whose bodies didn't get a graceful, chosen exit from size the way his did. Two of the most striking cases in the sport's history involve a squat rack accident and a body that simply couldn't hold its shape once training stopped. Not every physique loss in bodybuilding comes from a choice. Sometimes the decision gets made in a single moment, under a loaded bar, with no warning at all. That's exactly what happened to Jean-Pierre Fuchs, a competitor who was, at his peak, one of the most physically dominant men to ever step on a bodybuilding stage. Fuchs built his reputation the same way most 90s mass monsters did, through sheer, uncompromising size. At the height of his powers, Fuchs was an absolute mass monster who turned heads at every competition. He had the size and the physique to take his career very far. He looked like a man with years of high-level competition still ahead of him. Then, during preparation for a major competition, everything changed in an instant. The details of what happened are specific and brutal. In 2002, he was doing a photo shoot for Flex magazine and started doing a set of very heavy squats with 675 pounds on his back. As he squatted down, he was unable to get up. With the spotter not being close by, the weight came crashing down and suffered extensive damage to both of his knees and quads. That's not a gradual decline. That's a career-ending event that happened in the span of a single rep. Fuchs tried to fight his way back from it, the way most elite competitors would. But some injuries just don't allow for a return to form. While he still tried his best to train after his knees were destroyed, ultimately he had to give up on the idea of continuing his bodybuilding career and lost his gains as a result. The very next competition he'd been preparing for became the one that ended everything. During his preparation for the 2003 Night of Champions competition, his kidneys shut down and he was forced to retire from bodybuilding. The life Fuchs built afterward looks almost nothing like the one he had on stage. These days, he works with his wife in a property management company, and together they manage 82 buildings. The description of what happened to the body that once dominated competitions is stark. His impressive physique and huge muscles left without a trace. A man who could squat 675 pounds for reps now runs a property business. His competitive frame gone the moment his knees gave out under him. Bob Paris tells a different kind of story, but one that ends in a similarly dramatic disappearance of the physique that made him famous. Where Fuchs lost his body to a single accident, Paris's case shows what happens when a competitor simply walks away from training altogether and never looks back. He was, by most accounts, one of the most complete physiques the sport had ever produced. Often considered one of the most aesthetic bodybuilders in the sport's history, Bob Paris was a high-level competitor during the 80s and the era of Lee Haney. Paris retired from competition in the early 90s and built an entirely new life for himself outside the gym. Eventually, he retired from the sport in 1991. Since then, Paris has become a civil rights advocate, has performed in stage plays and on television, and has written a number of books. That's a complete pivot from posing trunks to activism, from competition prep to the stage, in a completely different sense of the word. And the physical consequence of that pivot has been just as complete. Once he stopped training with the intensity that built his aesthetic frame, the muscle simply didn't stick around. Since that time, it's clear that he hasn't hit the weights with relish for some time, as his gains have all but vanished. For a man once held up as a template for symmetry and proportion in the sport, that's as dramatic a before and after as bodybuilding has to offer. What Fuchs and Paris share, despite completely different paths out of the sport, is the same underlying lesson. The massive frames built through years of specialized training and eating don't maintain themselves. Whether it's a catastrophic injury that ends training overnight, or a conscious decision to walk away and never look back, the body responds the same way it lets the muscle go. And these two aren't isolated cases. Across the sport's history, this exact pattern, competitor at the top of their game, then a body that looks unrecognizable years later, repeats over and over again. By this point, a pattern should be obvious. It's not one or two isolated stories. It's close to a rule in competitive bodybuilding. Mustafa Mohammed is one of the stranger examples, because his career included not one but two separate disappearances of his physique, years apart. Mohammed built his reputation early, showing serious promise as a young competitor. One of the most prominent mystery cases in bodybuilding. Mustafa Mohammed was a bodybuilder who showed great promise. In his 20s, he won 2 world titles outside of the IFBB and looked like he could potentially dominate the competition. Then, at the height of that momentum, he vanished from the sport entirely. Then he retired suddenly, only to return 9 years later. That first retirement alone would be a strange enough story. But Mohammed's comeback wasn't the fairy tale return fans might have hoped for. While he was still physically impressive, he was never quite able to get to the top of the sport. And then, a full decade after that comeback, the same thing happened again. The size that made him a prospect in his 20s disappeared for good. Fast forward another decade, and it would appear that all of Mustafa's gains have left him, despite that he still had one of the most memorable physiques in bodybuilding history. 2 separate physiques, built and lost twice over inside a single career. Kevin Levrone offers yet another version of the same story, this one defined by a body that held its shape for an unusually long stretch before finally giving way. Levrone was one of the most dominant competitors of his generation on pure numbers alone. Kevin is the winner of 23 pro shows, holding the record of the most wins as an IFBB professional, until Ronnie Coleman set the new record in 2004. For a long time, Levrone maintained his toned physique, but soon decided to return his gains. Despite having been away from competition for well over a decade since he retired, even a physique built to last eventually succumbed to the same forces that hit everyone else on this list. Then there's Chris Cormier, whose story adds a different wrinkle, a career interrupted not by choice or by a single accident, but by a serious medical scare in the middle of his prime years. The real deal, Chris Cormier started competing as a light heavyweight in the NPC Nationals in 1987, finishing at first place and starting a long and successful career at the biggest stages of bodybuilding, including Mr. Olympia, many believing that he could have been a Mr. Olympia champ if it wasn't for a spinal infection in 2006 that took him out of the sport for an extended period of time in his prime. His path out was a health crisis, not a decision, but the outcome for his physique followed the same trajectory as the rest. Even Jay Cutler, who's managed his own decline about as gracefully as anyone in the sport, has weighed in on why this keeps happening across generation after generation of top-level competitors. Asked to name names of retired pros who have held their shape, he pointed to a short list. And the fact that it's a short list says everything. He spoke on retired bodybuilders staying in shape, including Dexter Jackson, Kevin Levrone, Dorian Yates, Lee Labrada, and Rich Gaspari, saying he still looks at pictures of Dexter and is shocked at how big he really was, but thinks he still looks good, thinks Levrone looks really good, thinks Yates looks good for a retired pro, and calls Labrada's current look unbelievable. That's Jay Cutler from Inside the Sport, essentially confirming that staying in great shape after retirement is the exception worth naming individually, not the rule. So what actually drives this across every single case, from Coleman's spine to Dillett's waistline? The physical demands never really go away once a body has been pushed to that level. Cardiovascular strain is a constant thread running through almost every one of these stories. Cardiovascular health deserves particular focus during life after bodybuilding. The combination of extreme weight fluctuations, stimulant use, and cardiovascular stress from training can increase risks of hypertension, irregular heart rhythms, and other cardiac issues. Add to that the hormonal disruption that lingers for years after a competitive career ends. Hormonal disruption from extreme dieting, supplement use, and training stress can persist long after retirement, and both male and female athletes may experience fertility challenges, mood regulation issues, and metabolic adaptations that require medical attention. There's also a psychological piece that shows up again and again in how these men talk about their own transformations. Losing 30, 60, sometimes 100+ pounds of stage muscle isn't just a physical shift. It's a complete identity change for people whose entire adult lives were built around a single visual standard. Competitive bodybuilding provides clear structure, measurable goals, and defined identity markers that suddenly disappear upon retirement. And motivation can waver without the driving force of upcoming competitions. Former bodybuilders frequently struggle to maintain training intensity when external validation and competitive deadlines no longer exist. That's Coleman still training 6 days a week from a wheelchair. That's Cutler calling his workouts meditation instead of a mission. That's Dillett walking away entirely and calling it the better life. What ties every single name in this story together, Coleman, Cutler, Dillett, Fuchs, Paris, Mohammed, Levrone, Cormier, is that none of them kept the body that made them famous. Some lost it to a snapped disc, some to a single rep under 675 pounds, some to a calculated decision made in their 40s, and some just from years of not lifting with the same purpose. The frames that once dominated the biggest stages in the sport didn't survive retirement intact for a single one of them. Coleman is still chasing his own recovery timeline, still pushing toward a specific date when he hopes to walk unaided again. Cutler is still adjusting his numbers year by year, still telling his audience exactly how much smaller he's gotten and why. Dillett is still running his business, decades removed from the 290-pound frame that made him a legend, at peace with the trade he made. Their stories aren't finished, but the physiques that made them household names in the sport, those are already gone. And by their own accounts, they're not